things and Tiffany's.
Money was not any object, period.
But when the body of Elena's big teddy bear washed up in a barrel, her American dream became a nightmare. A twisted tale of sex, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder. Next on Snapped. Elena was born poor in Moscow in 1966. Her childhood was difficult, to say the least.
Mother was a drug addict. It was not a healthy home life.
Later on in life, someone that would be in this situation would maybe be willing to do more to get what they need, or sort of look out for themselves primarily rather than maybe other people.
But even under such dismal circumstances, Elena had high hopes. As a young woman trying to make ends meet in Moscow, she met Boris Kalichis.
She was 17, he was 34.
His nickname was Wild Board. He was a nice, outgoing, heavy-set, big guy.
Boris was a wealthy oligarch, one of Russia's emerging capitalists. He was making a fortune in aviation fuel.
And we started going together. Since then, I don't remember myself without him. I was absolutely shocked. Absolutely shocked. I've never met a man like this in my life. Me away.
Someone who grows up in a situation similar to hers, you know, may be attracted to someone who is older, well-established.
Boris left his wife and son and moved in with Elena. Life should have been good for the new couple, but Boris's business was dangerous.
That was a very dangerous business in Russia. He had 8 partners. All of them were killed by mobsters.
Elena and Boris decided they'd be safer if they left Russia.
They went to Poland for a time and eventually came to the United States.
In 1992, Elena and Boris moved into the tightly knit Russian immigrant community of Brighton Beach in Brooklyn, New York.
It was on April 16, 1992. I remember I had a beautiful apartment and everything was so perfect. So I think it was just the time to have a baby. My child was born on June 5th, 1992.
Boris was thrilled with his new son.
He was so happy running around telling everybody that finally we have a boy. Then he bought him a huge monkey. So that he's never going to be afraid at night. That's going to be his friend. He loved him to death.
And he was just as thrilled 2 years later when Elena gave birth to a daughter, Sonia.
Kids were devoted to their mother, but they also loved the father. He doted on them. They were a happy family.
With 2 growing children, Elena and Boris needed more space.
And I love Manhattan. I wanted to be close to Manhattan, so I was picking and choosing all the areas, and then we found the Toad Hill area on the Staten Island, which looked very good to us. It was perfect. It was close to everywhere, and they had a beautiful school over there, and quiet, secure.
And expensive, but that was no problem. Boris paid cash for the 9,000 square foot mansion on East Loop Road.
It had an indoor heated swimming pool, garage, you know, nice grounds.
And she totally gutted it and had the whole thing redone.
The poor little girl from Moscow had become a wealthy New Yorker with a vengeance.
She was just like a kid in a candy store. She spent her money lavishly, never gave a second thought to cost of anything.
Someone like this, their self-esteem may be lower, and who they are is defined by the amount of money they have or their sort of social status. And so demonstrating that to everyone else is important, so everyone else knows, that, I'm not that poor girl anymore.
Life was better than Elena ever thought it could be. There was just one problem. Boris's business kept him in Russia 3 weeks out of every month.
It was very dangerous. I feared. Did I ever feared? Every day, every minute, every second. And on top of it, he was flying twice a month 4 times a month.
Elena wasn't just worried. She was lonely.
She missed him a great deal. And, but he was very busy making money. And so that was kind of, she was torn between wanting to have the money and wanting to have her husband with her and wanting her family.
So when Boris was around, she always tried to make the most of it. Like in the spring of 1992, when she and Boris and the 2 kids planned to go on the ultimate family vacation, a trip to Disney World. But this trip would be different. And when Elena returned, she would find herself in a never-never land of cops, con men, and killer conspiracies. After only 8 years in America, Russian immigrants Elena Kalichis and her husband Boris were the envy of their upscale Staten Island neighbors.
You know, there was the husband, wife, 2 young children. The husband was making a lot of money, and they had a nice house.
Elena and Boris felt as if they've achieved the pinnacle of success.
And in March of 2000, the whole family was supposed to go for the pinnacle of American vacations, a week at Disney World. Only Boris didn't join them, which actually wasn't that strange.
Elena didn't find it strange that Boris wasn't around. It often happened that he would return to Russia.
When the family returned on March 31st, there was still no sign of Boris. Days went by, and when Boris still didn't surface, his brother Alexander became alarmed.
They were usually in touch with each other, but he, I think, checked with Moscow, and Moscow said, no, Boris isn't back. He left and never came back.
Then on April 2nd, a very drunk Elena Kalichis entered the Staten Island police station. She told officers that her husband was missing.
She had any idea what might have happened to him, up into it, including that the fact he might still be in Russia.
Her story was that she didn't know where he was. Gee, dear Boris is probably off to Moscow.
But Elena did say she'd had a fight with Boris just before their trip to Disney World.
She admitted the fact that they were, they were speaking about divorce, her concern that he was going to ruin her financially.
That same day, the police got a surprise phone call from a man named Messiah Justice. Mr. Justice claimed to know Elena very, very well.
The first day after we spoke with Elena, we spoke to Messiah Justice on the phone. And he freely admitted to having a relationship with Elena.
In fact, he'd met Elena 2 years before Boris disappeared.
I met Messiah in 1999. At the end of October, I got lost in downtown Manhattan. There was a Mercedes Jeep next to me.
He gave her his card, and she said she called him. And they had begun discussing this business about designer clothes, that perhaps she could have her own line of just designer clothes.
But Messiah didn't just want to dress Elena. He wanted to undress her.
He told her that she was beautiful, couldn't understand how her husband could leave her, and she was very vulnerable at the time. And she believed everything he had to say.
With Boris absent most of the time, Messiah's style quickly won over the fashion-conscious and lonely Russian.
And I closed my eyes on everything. I just wanted to help that guy.
He came in flattering her, telling her how beautiful she is and how exciting her life is, and really sort of solidified these things that she was insecure about.
At first, Elena and Messiah met in hotels in New York City. But since Boris was gone 3 weeks a month, it was a lot more convenient to just stay home.
Messiah basically moved in the bedroom with Elena. There was no hiding it from the children that this was her boyfriend.
When people exhibit the kind of behavior where they'll invite their lover into the house when their children are still there, it could be that they are, on some level, they want their significant other, their husband, to know. Clearly, on some level, would bother him that another man was in his house, in his bed, while his children were there. And this is a huge form of revenge, and it's a huge form of making him really angry.
It sure did. When Boris found out, Elena's teddy bear became a wild boar.
He was screaming so loud. He was talking on the phone with her, and fortunately they spoke in Russian, so half of the curses used was not understood in the office.
I think he was planning her, shall we say, her divorce.
That would certainly explain the fight. But it didn't explain why Boris missed the trip to Disney World and why he hadn't been heard from since. The answer to that question came on April 25th. That morning, a couple of kids in Queens made a grisly discovery.
They found Boris's body floating in a cardboard barrel in a marshy area in an inlet off Jamaica Bay.
The body was wrapped in towels, sheets, and blankets.
Medical examiner indicated that Boris was killed by a single shot to the back of his head.
What had been a missing person case was now a homicide. The first thing the cops did was haul Messiah Justice in. When they ran a background check, it turned out that Justice wasn't just a wannabe designer.
Messiah's criminal record indicated he was somewhat of a con man. He did have other, convictions that would indicate he was a bit of a con man.
And now he seemed to be involved in something much more serious than a simple con.
They said to him, listen, you want to go for murder too? He said, not me. I didn't do it. And everything, whatever he knew, came up.
Luckily, Messiah Justice was happy to be of assistance. He agreed to tell the cops everything.
He indicated that Elena admitted to killing Boris and asked him to help get rid of the body.
They bought a cardboard barrel, stuffed it in the barrel, and then drove out to an inlet in Jamaica Bay, and he dumped it.
It was a nice story. When the cops brought Elena in for questioning, she claimed it was nonsense.
Boris was that treasure I actually needed, because without him, it wouldn't be no money, it wouldn't be no good life, it wouldn't be no father for my kids.
According to Elena, if either of them had motive to kill Boris, it was Messiah.
He found out that I told my husband about him. He also knew that my husband is a very powerful man, and he would destroy him.
With Boris out of the picture, you could have the woman, the house, the money, everything.
It was a classic case of he said, she said. Unfortunately for Elena, the cops believed Messiah.
We felt that there wasn't a lot of motive for him to want to get rid of Boris. He was able to enjoy, 3/4 of the time. He was able to live in his house, drive his cars, sleep with his wife.
On May 5th, 2000, the NYPD showed up at the Kalichis mansion with a search warrant and an arrest warrant.
Detectives went to her house and brought her in. She was intoxicated at the time. She was very unemotional about her arrest.
Messiah Justice was released without bail. While Elena sat in jail awaiting trial, both sides worked feverishly to build their cases. But no matter how hard they worked, it was all going to come down to the simple question of who a jury would believe, the beautiful Russian immigrant or the gigolo con man. The State of New York versus Elena Kalichis opened June 6, 2002 in Staten Island. Elena's lover, a con man named Messiah Justice, had fingered her for the crime. When the trial opened, the prosecution lost no time in painting Elena as an immoral, cheating gold digger. Bored with her older, overweight husband, the state claimed that she was ready to move on.
The ADA said, I remember because I was so offended by it, that Elena didn't need Boris. He was old and fat and ugly. And that's why she killed him.
They claimed she had killed him and then headed off to Disney World for a little vacation. In their opening remarks, the defense freely admitted that Elena was no saint.
I told this jury, this woman will not win Mother of the Year. She's not the most faithful, loyal spouse. She had an affair openly in her home with a younger black man, and that affair continued even in the presence of her children. It does not mean Elena Collegis murdered her husband.
The prosecution claimed that in this case it did. They put on witnesses who testified that Boris had been threatening to divorce Elena and leave her penniless as a result of the affair.
There was conversations between herself and Boris that he wanted to divorce her.
He said that he would leave her without any funds at all.
Rather than wait for Boris to divorce her, prosecutors argued Elena decided to divorce him, so to speak.
She decided that she was going to divorce him, but Russian style. And that was with a pistol.
The medical examiner testified that Boris Collegis was struck in the back of the head, fell to the floor, and was then in cold blood executed with one bullet to the temple.
Prosecutors argued that Elena lured Boris to the basement of their Staten Island mansion and shot him.
She was a cold-blooded murderess. As simple as that.
The circumstantial evidence was strong, and it all centered around the trip to Disney World.
The maid indicated to us that normally her days off was Sunday, and that prior to leaving for Disney, Elena asked her to take Saturday off and come in Sunday, which she never asked her to do before. She also indicated when she got in the house on Sunday, there was a note left for her to clean up the basement, especially the doors to the boiler room.
Just in time to clean up after a murder. According to the police, they found towels, sheets, and blankets in the mansion that matched the ones Boris's body was wrapped in. But there was no sign of blood anywhere.
We conducted extensive luminol tests of the walls, the doors. We were not able to come up with any traces of blood.
If Elena had killed Boris in the basement, surely there would have been a trace of blood somewhere. The prosecution claimed that they knew where the blood was. It was on a 4x4 piece of carpeting. The only problem was they didn't have it.
Within 2 days after Boris was missing, they installed new carpeting. They were supposed to have the old carpeting removed from the premises. However, it was stored in the garage. And later, the police found that carpeting with the 4x4 piece cut out.
Even though the missing carpet was never found, the defense was willing to concede that Boris was killed in the basement. The question was, who killed him?
The issue was not where was Boris Collegis killed. The issue was who killed him. Not where, or even how. Who. It was a who question. Who fired that shot? Who put that bullet into the head of Boris Collegis? The frail, thin, innocent Elena? Or this cold, calculating, violent Messiah Justice?
When he took the stand on day 5 of the trial, cold, calculating, violent Messiah didn't come across as all that cold or calculating, and he portrayed Elena as the violent one.
He seemed to present himself quite well. I think he was just a regular guy that had some hard breaks in his life. He survived on the streets.
He testified that she phoned him on the night of March 24th and begged him to come over. She brought him inside, showed him Boris's wrapped body in the basement, and told him to get rid of it. Elena's lawyers weren't buying Messiah's Good Samaritan routine.
Who was more likely the person to commit the crime? This 100-pound, blonde-haired housewife who couldn't lift anything heavier than a grocery bag, or Messiah Justice?
And phone records showed Messiah never answered a call that night from the mansion as he claimed. Calls were made, but never answered. When it came time for closing arguments, the defense's main argument remained that the state was trying the wrong defendant. Instead of Elena in the dock, it should have been con artist gigolo Messiah Justice.
The defense put up, Mark Fonte had put up in the closing arguments that Justice had hidden in the basement, waited for Boris, shot and killed him, and then made phone calls from the basement to his cell phone and to his home phone to kind of cover up as though she was calling him from the house, to say, come over and help me.
But with no murder weapon, no witnesses, and no forensic evidence, the trial ended pretty much as it began. with the question of whom to believe. Convinced the state had not proven their case, the defense elected not to put Elena on the stand.
It was really a matter whether the jury believed him or not. And if they believed him, you know, you convict her. If you don't believe him, you don't convict her.
Closing arguments ended on June 25th. The jury took 1 hour and 20 minutes to return their verdict. They found Elena guilty.
Guilty. I was like in a dream. Guilty.
On September 24th, 2002, Elena Kalichis was sentenced to 22 years to life for the murder of her husband, Boris.
We as a society can accept certain crimes. We're not so thrilled about them, but we can accept criminal behavior if it's justified, if it makes some sense. Like in a woman that was maybe beaten by her husband and then killed him, at least the jury can sort of make some sense out of that. But in a case where it's sort of a cold-blooded killing, especially by a woman, society has a really hard time